Coming up on today's Locked On Senators, the Sens hit the practice ice. They got reinforcements, but D.J Smith with a bit of a head scratcher on the fourth line.
And we have a SensCentral Citizen today. It's Michael Czar. He tells us all about how he became a Sens fan and more.
This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started. This is the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.
Your Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm Jake Sanderson, and you're listening to Locked On Senators podcast.
I'm Tim Stützle, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
And welcome inside episode 741 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Ross Levitan on the outskirts of enemy territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains. Today is Wednesday, February 22nd. Please leave a comment below to help the show grow. Comments could range from what are the Senators doing with Mathieu Joseph, or which injured returning player are you most excited to see in the lineup? Is it Cam Talbot? Is it Jake Sanderson? Or are you going to be a funny guy and say it's Nick Holden? Pilsy, who are you most excited to see back when the Senators are in Carolina Friday?
Well, I'm usually a funny guy, so maybe I'll go with Nick Holden. But in all seriousness, I think Jake Sanderson is the play here because as much as Cam Talbot is an important part of this team, no offense, his replacements did pretty good in his absence in Mads Søgaard and Kevin Mandolese. So I don't think that's the crucial part of this team. The D-corps needs help. And Jake Sanderson is arguably the most reliable defenseman on this team right now. So it's going to be a welcome sight to see number 85 back on the ice for the Sens.
It certainly will be. He was back in his usual spot at practice today beside Travis Hamonic. The only difference is Sanderson was still wearing a non-contact jersey. D.J Smith saying afterwards he expects him to be in a normal jersey yesterday and hopes that Sanderson will be in the lineup on Friday, whereas Nick Holden and Cam Talbot are both all but confirmed back. I mean, Talbot is 100% because Kevin Mandolese was reassigned. So there are only Talbot and Mads Søgaard up with the big club. I'll play devil's advocate. I'll go Cam Talbot for two reasons. One, he gives this team the best chance to win going into games. Just look at FanDuel Sportsbook. The lines, as the kids did great, but the lines betting, the confidence outside of Senators land was not high that the Sens could win games. So he gives you that veteran presence. And also his start will be 1 week ahead of the trade deadline. And I think that that's the biggest trade chip the Sens have. They could also keep him, use that experience for value down the stretch. But I do think that teams will want him to show he's healthy, show he's 100%, missed time at the start of the year with the rib injury, missed time with the lower body injury just now. So this is what do we have in Cam Talbot? And they're going to need both goalies because they're entering their busiest stretch this season with the rescheduled game against Detroit, which is going to be, I don't know if it's Monday, Tuesday, which game's the rescheduled one?
I think the Tuesday one is the rescheduled one.
So back-to-back games, back-to-backs, if I can say that, Pillsy. 4 games in 5 nights, you're going to need both tendies to play well. Now, the good news is they played well against Detroit last year, and this year, maybe that's what Mathieu Joseph needs to get started, but get going, I should say, offensively. They tried moving him up the lineup to the first line, but now they bypassed the second and third line. They put him right down on the fourth line. Pillsy, I'll read off the lines from today's practice, and then I want your answer on how do you get Mathieu Joseph going offensively. Only 3 goals this season in 37 games. He had 4 goals in 12 games when he came to Ottawa last spring. The lines at practice today at the Sensplex: Tim Stützle between Brady Tkachuk and Claude Giroux. Shane Pinto is centering Alex DeBrincat and Drake Batherson. Ridley Gregg is centering Derek Brassard and Julien Gauthier, his first practice with Ottawa. And then Dylan Gambrell is between Mathieu Joseph and Austin Watson. On defense, Chabot and Zub, Sanderson and Hamonic, and Brandstrom with Zaitsev. So Holden, although healthy, is the 7th defenseman. Parker Kelly, the extra forward. Talbot and Søgaard are your two goaltenders?
Yeah, I really don't have a good answer for you, Ross, because I thought Mathieu Joseph fit perfectly on that third line when it was Mott, Pinto, Joseph. I thought that was going to have success. You got a defensive guy in Mott, a two-way guy in Pinto, and then a speedy offensive guy in Joseph. That didn't exactly work, as we see. You read off his stats, only 3 goals, 10 assists in 37 games. And then it's like, okay, we bring him up to the top line. You got to be able to succeed with Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle. Wasn't really getting it done. Yeah, no points there, which is very unfortunate. And now he's stuck in the fourth line here. So putting him on the fourth line with Gambrell and Watson certainly would not be my answer to how you get him going.
Gambrell's on a 1-game point streak, dude.
It's true, and he was looking pretty good, actually, in that game against Boston. But I really thought that you want to keep Joseph on that third line. We were looking at his numbers with different line mates, Ross, and it seemed like he played pretty well with Brassard on the opposite wing there. But I think the Ottawa Senators really want to see what they have in Julien Gauthier here, so I don't think they're going to put him on the fourth line just quite yet. I don't know. I think we start looking at Mathieu Joseph as more of a speedy defensive guy. Like, he does great work on the penalty kill as far as I'm concerned. He's an offensive threat on the kill. He's able to break up passes. He's got good instincts, but he just has had no success 5-on-5, it seems.
Pilsy, he has 0 5-on-5 goals this year.
That's what I'm saying. No 5-on-5. He scored a 3-on-5 goal, but no 5-on-5. Jeez.
2 shorthanded and 1 on the power play. 0 even strength goals. And you could tell the ice time in the Boston game took a hit. Only 12 minutes and 45 seconds for him and no points in his last 5 games. And what really kind of caught my attention is when he was up on that top line for, what was it, a 3-game sample, give or take?
Something like that, yeah.
The Chicago game and St. Louis. Stützle and Tkachuk were still scoring at 5-on-5. He just wasn't getting a piece of the action. And it just seemed like obviously he can keep up, but it just seems like he's not getting the puck touches at the right time. The forechecking is there, but it almost feels like he just forechecks for the sake of forechecking. It's not like when Brady goes in, he hits the guy and then immediately looks to make a play on the puck. It feels like Joseph hits a guy and then they just move it to the other defense when they break it out. Just doesn't feel like there's that sustainability when they get in the offensive zone with him. And I mean, the 4-year contract, we could get into that as I don't think they're moving him. I don't know if a team's going to jump on that unless it's a salary dump the other way. And at that point, you signed him for a reason when you did. He played so well after coming over in the spring, and sample size be damned. He showed glimpses of what makes him a great player. It's elite speed. It's great anticipation defensively, turning over loose pucks. And I think he just needs to get back to that. But I'm with you. Playing him with Gambrell and Watson's not the answer here. So how long do you continue to trot it out like that? Derek Brassard, I guess, is the X factor here. He's getting set to play in game 996 on Friday. And if all goes as planned, he will play in game number 1000 against the New York Rangers, the team that he played the most of his career with, on the Thursday, the day before the trade deadline. Now, the first home game would be against Columbus, the team that drafted him. I would assume they'd honor him at that game. Does that you say that he's going to be here past the trade deadline?
Are you asking if I think they're going to move him?
Derek Brassard, yeah.
I don't think so. And I think if they did, it would be one of those, Pierre goes to Derek and says, hey, after your 1000th game, do you want to go somewhere, and we'll take a future consideration and we'll let you move on? Because I think once he hits that 1,000 games, he needs to be the extra forward or not on this roster. Not because I don't think he can play. Like, he's actually played pretty well considering the circumstances.
He's played better than the 2 other guys like the Gambrell and Watson's on the 4th line.
Well, and especially considering how bad this bottom 6 has been. Like, this bottom 6 just has not worked out in any shape or form, unfortunately, for the Sens. But I think you need to have the rest of the season. You got to call Sokolov up. I think he needs a chance on that third line. I don't think Derek Brassard needs a chance. Austin Watson very likely could be traded. Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick have kind of flirted with the idea that the Pittsburgh Penguins could use a guy like him, add a little grit to their lineup. So I think that's something that could work out. You want to see what you got from Julien Gauthier. Gambrell, I would prefer to have Mark Kastelik playing games as a 4th-line center, especially with his face-off ability. I think that could come in big handy for the Sens here. But I don't know what to do with Mathieu Joseph, honestly. Like, I think you want him on a third line. You want him playing somewhere around 15 minutes. You want him to be able to have a spark offensively, someone on his line that can kind of give and go with him. But it just hasn't worked out for him in any spot they put him. It really hasn't. So I'm kind of at a loss for words with Joseph, unfortunately. And it's not because I think he's been bad, Ross. It's just he's right there, but he just can't push through like he did last season with the Sens.
And we're not expecting him to be over a point per game and shoot.
No.
Right? He's shooting 6.8% this year, but even his last, 3 of his 4 years in Tampa, he had 13, 12, and then 8 goals before he was traded. It was 12 goals total between the two in Ottawa. So it's like, okay, we know it's a down year with that. So what else are you going to bring? And some people are replying because we posted this on Twitter at SensCentral. They think he's playing well. And I think the numbers would show that, shot attempts for and against a 5-on-5, it's not the end-all be-all, but he's below 50%. A lot of the Sens guys, especially guys who have chances in the top 6, are over 50%. Expected goals, all those things, they aren't showing that he's contributing to more goals for than against. And I hope he can, because he brings such an element of speed, especially without Alex Formenton. It seemed like he would have been the perfect guy to fill that role of being a pain in the ass to play against, turn over pucks, and find ways to make, I feel like that's the kind of guy who should be getting secondary assists, where he does the grinding work, gets the puck, turns it over, he moves it to open space, and then it's the old hockey assist where then he moves it to the guy who scores. But unfortunately, it's just not happening this year. Let us know in the comments how you would get Mathieu Joseph going, because the bottom 6 contributing offensively is a huge asset. When you have 4 games in 5 nights, you can't put that much pressure on the top end guys. When we have our next conversation from Cabo on Wednesday, Pilsy, after this big stretch, 4 and 5, we're still your team every day. I think that there's going to be a very strong correlation with the win-loss record and the bottom 6 production going into this stretch, because you can't expect, I know there's a couple bad teams in the mix there, Montreal, but they need to get production from all 4 lines. Julien Gauthier, Mathieu Joseph are my locked-on players to watch for the whole week. Those guys need to get it rolling.
And Ross, I don't even need production from the fourth line. Like, the fourth line, go in there, bang bodies, forecheck hard, chip and chase, don't get scored on. That's fine. But we need a little bit of a boost from that third line. So, especially, Ridley Gregg, he got his first goal here. He's the type of player that I think with the right guys around him, he could have success in a third line role going up against lesser matchups than he was used to as a second line center starting in the NHL. But yeah, the Mathieu Joseph, he was given that contract because he was supposed to be the kind of the key cog in the top 9 situation, right? He was going to be a bona fide third liner that with injuries, you'd be comfortable moving him up to the second or even first line, which they've done, but he hasn't been that guy.
Let us know as well in the comments, but also a couple Belleville Sens forwards are chomping at the bit. We've always said Crooker, we've always said Igor, but is there a new dark horse who should maybe get an NHL debut? We'll hit on that after our SensCentral Citizen. That's all coming up on Locked On Senators.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. They're the presenting sponsor of this show, and they are the Locked On Podcast Network's official sportsbook. They're the number 1 sportsbook in North America. They're an official partner of the NFL. What more do you want? Well, there's more. They have a great app, Ross. I love using their app. It's simple, safe, secure, easy to use. Check out the promotions tab. I'm always telling people to at least take a look at that. Every morning I take a look, see if there's anything interesting, and there usually is. And for our friends down in the States, new customers, if you join today, you're going to get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at fanduel.com/lockedon. They got everything from money line, point spread, player props. You can do same game parlays for a bigger chance at a bigger payout. That's why we love FanDuel. So don't forget, check it out. First $5 bet is going to get you $150 in free bets, win or lose, which is awesome, at fanduel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Today's episode is also brought to you by my favorite place on planet Earth, It's Shawarma Palace. You already knew where I was going with that because you know I love Shawarma Palace. We made sure to stop at Shawarma Palace. We got not one, not two, but 3 meals out of one platter of Shawarma
Ross,
Palace.
I'll even go further. I kept those pitas that we didn't end up finishing after 3 attempts, and I made some pitas at home with Shawarma Palace, the wraps there. So it's a gift that keeps on giving.
And you can head to any of their locations in Ottawa and support local, support Sens fans, and honestly, go get better value than at the grocery store. For $20, the platter is the best deal in town, and you can go try it for yourself. Get the extra garlic, treat yourself, have the hummus, the little olive oil in there. They put the chili powder on top. It's a beautiful thing at Shawarma Palace. They treat you like family from the moment you walk in the door, and they also have lots of other goodies that you can see in their display case. And you can go grab them, bring them home too. Whether you like the mixed shawarma, the chicken, the beef, it's all up to you at Shawarma Palace. You can get whatever you want on your wraps, but make sure that you check them out. Shawarma Palace, Sens game days taste better at Shawarma Palace. 4 games in 5 nights. That's a recipe for Shawarma Palace, if you ask me. Go to Shawarma Palace right now. Whether it's the one Rito and Augusta, Pilsey's favorite one, or if you're going Bank Street, you can go anywhere. They're in Orleans. They're in the Carleton University food court. Go eat like a royal at Shawarma Palace. All right, Pilsey. What do you say we get to this week's SensCentral Citizen?
Let's do it. It was a great Citizen, and I love doing the Citizens. It's so nice to give people the opportunity to fully tell their story, and Michael does a great job of that.
And Michael was at the Glebe Central Pub with us, which was awesome. We had a great time at the Glebe Central Pub, and we can't wait for our next time out. So here he is, this week's SensCentral Citizen. It's Michael Czar. All right, we now welcome on this week's SensCentral Citizen. You can follow Michael on Twitter at @ExtraWavy. The spelling is in the description below. Michael, welcome to Locked On Senators. How are you doing today, man?
Doing good. It's kind of nice to wake up early for once. My job usually requires me to wake up later in the day, but hey, this is an excuse to fix my sleep schedule a little bit, so I do appreciate it, actually.
Well, you're dressed to the nines as well with the
Yep,
Sens jersey, Sens hat, wearing the draft day kit. We absolutely love to see that. Is that a Jake Sanderson old school 2D?
Nice.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
during the what was it, the Fan Fest, before the season even began, as soon as we found out that Jake Sanderson would be, making his way into the lineup, I had this white jersey with no name, no number, and I went to the the Sens store at the CTC, and I asked them if they could put his number and name on the back. And they were a little bit wary of it because this technically isn't an official jersey, which sometimes the lettering and the numbers don't fit properly. But as soon as I handed it to him and the guy there at the press looked at it, he's like, no, this is fine. So I ended up getting a Jake Sanderson jersey. And a fun thing, too, is I don't know if they still have it in the arena, but that big Fan Fest collage where they took all the pictures of people who went to that event and put them together with pictures to make the Sens logo. I'm near the top left with a Jake Sanderson jersey on.
Nice.
So I must be a pretty rare one there. I didn't see many Sanderson jerseys at the Fan Fest. First game, yes, but not during the Fan Fest.
Oh, yeah, and there's going to be more and more as his career blossoms as
Yes.
it will going forward. Love that, and perfect timing to have you on as Jake Sanderson returned to practice today.
Yes.
But we got to get back to the beginning, Michael. We
Yes.
start every SensCentral Citizen the same way. How did you initially become an Ottawa Senators fan?
Okay. It's not really that complicated of a story. It was really just because I lived in the middle of nowhere, and aside from a kid watching cartoons and Mythbusters and other things on the Discovery Channel, the only other thing that I really found really enjoyable, especially from like a fan perspective, was hockey. So I remember whenever I found out that there is a local team, and my dad was very heavy into it as well. He kind of brought me into it pretty well, and it was funny too because I know both my parents immigrated from Poland. So my dad and my mom were both here about in their 20s, and they wanted to get more accustomed to the lifestyle in Canada. And one of them, with my dad especially, who was more of a fan of traditional sports, was like, okay, let's get invested in hockey. Now, when they originally moved and where I was originally born was Toronto. So unfortunately, one of my deepest, darkest secrets is for about a 2-3 year span, I was technically a Leafs fan. And I hate that part of myself to this day. But then whenever, about when I was like 4 or 5 years old, my parents moved to Ottawa, and basically all my memories are in Ottawa. So essentially from that period on, I would say I was a Sens fan because that's when my dad became a Sens fan and he was the one who brought me into it. But then like a lot more of the memorable moments come around, obviously the 06-07 Cup run when I was about 10. So it was like, some memorable memories. Most of them were just watching my TV, in the middle of nowhere between Osgood and Kentville at home. But at the same time, I even mentioned it during our Friday meetup at the Glebe Central Pub. I mentioned how like one of my earliest memories was going to my first ever Sens game with my dad and seeing Chris Neal score, hanging over the net against the Bruins. And it's funny too, because I also remember that game so particularly because they scored 6 goals that game, which means we went and got a free pizza.
Nice.
And that was when they still had that promotion. So like that was one of the best ways to go to your first NHL game, to see your local team win, beat a pretty good team at the time in Boston, and get free pizza. Like you can't beat that.
Yeah, that's how you get a kid hooked right there. And
Yes.
Michael, we've had a kind of trend, Ross, recently, our SensCentral Citizen saying, look, I'm sorry, guys, my parents made me a Habs fan or a Leafs fan, but we always forgive those people because you're just following the influence of your parents, and then you get cognizant enough that you're like, okay, I can't be, this is not how I align myself as a person. I am now going to be a Sens fan, despite what my family or my parents want from me. So we forgive you, and you're on the right side now.
And I kudos to my dad too, because he also changed sides. Like he didn't stay a Leafs fan when he moved here. He became an Ottawa fan, and that's why I became an Ottawa fan as well.
Perfect.
So, who are some of your first favorite players with the Sens? I know you brought up Chris Neal by name. We were lucky to see you on Friday, and we appreciate you coming to the Glebe Central Pub. It was awesome to get to chat with you there. Is Chris Neal one of the guys? And if so, or if not, who were the first guys where you're like, man, I'm a fan of him and the team, not just the team?
It's funny because like I don't have a lot of memories of the early Senators, obviously, just from the way that I was brought into like the Senators fan base. Especially, I'm really quite young. I'm only like 26, so I probably don't. That would make sense for me to have a lot of memories of the early Sens. But it's funny because if there's one thing I did a lot when I was younger, I watched Sportsnet top 10s on YouTube, like just any that I could, and a lot of them involving hockey. So unironically, one of my favorite, or not even favorite, just one player that stuck in my mind and I remember loving watching was Peter Schaefer. Because he had that one goal where he like flipped the puck over the goalie and then tapped it in on the net before like going around it. And that was like one of the top 10 plays of some sort of Sportsnet top 10 or SportsCenter top 10. And I love that. Chris Neal, obviously, because I was a big fan of blowing people along the boards at any moment by any player. Who else? I remember as a kid, I loved Mike Fisher in terms of just his play and the way that he was part of the team. But then I think if I have to put number one, it has to be Spezza. And part of the reason why is because even though my older brother isn't a fan of hockey, like we were both fans of hockey when we were younger, and he's only 2 years older than me, so we're kind of in the same age group as well. And he was a big artist, and he kind of still is to this day. Like I said, he's a game dev, he's a designer, in Toronto. Cool. But he drew a specific piece of art of Jason Spezza, number 39, scoring a goal, and we had it hanging on the stairs down to our basement. And as a kid playing games in a basement, I would pass by that almost every day. So I remember I loved that drawing my brother made, but then I also loved watching Jason Spezza play. So I think if I had to pick one player that was like my favorite player growing up, aside from Neal, Alfie, I would even say Carlson, but that's obviously towards the later years of my youth. It would definitely be Spezza.
Yeah, I mean, a Spezza in a 39 jersey, that's
old school,
but you don't see that often.
It's so specific, and I'm really tempted that if I do have enough money to get a jersey again in the future, get a 39 Spezza jersey, because that would be so unique.
Pilsy would have no clue what that's like, because the day he became a Sens fan was when Jason Spezza handed Dominic Hasek that jersey at 39.
Yeah.
And they nameplate right off at the press conference.
It's true.
That's interesting, because I always forget that that's why he changed it.
Yeah, but I mean, when the Dominator comes in, you gotta make
obviously.
That also, I feel like 19 worked a lot better for Spezza anyways.
Yeah, it fit. And as a guy, who loves the number 19 as well, born in the 90s, as well as born on the 19th of a month, I understand the appreciation of number 19.
What would you do to honor Jason Spezza? Is he a Ring of Honor guy for you?
I would say Ring of Honor. Yeah, I wouldn't say he's a retired number, just because not only did he go to Toronto, but also he went to Toronto and very heavily expressed how much he loved it, which I think already kind of puts you on some fragility. But at the same time, you can't deny what he did for the franchise. He was one of their best players during their best period, like alongside Heatley, Alfredson, and the only other player I reckon probably since then that's hit those same highs would be Carlson, right? And then maybe you could say Stone whenever he was in his prime. Maybe you could say it might be a hot take, but the 1 year where he was very good, Duchesne was kind of hitting those numbers as well. But obviously, Spets is on a different level with how long he played, how good he was. And yeah, I would say he's a Ring of Honor guy. The only problem is it's less on if the Sens would honor him and more if Jason Spezza would accept it. Because I feel like he's way more tied to the Leafs franchise now. I know he's still part of their organization. So I'm not sure how that goes. I'm not sure. Obviously I've seen people who work for other franchises be recognized by one of their older ones. So it's not out of the question. But I would think so. I think Ring of Honor.
I'm going to keep saying this until I will it into reality. They should hang a slice of pizza banner from the rafters to honor that entire line.
Or it'd be a pizza shaped banner, but it'd be still red with the number and everything. It's just the shape of the pizza.
That'd be good. Now, speaking of the pizza line, I was just thinking this, and we can brainstorm this. Do you think there's any sort of iteration of the top 6 in the Sens lineup right now that could come close to matching the pizza line? Like, we've had this top 6 has been lethal, but there's so many injuries and so many flip-flopping lines. Like, there hasn't been one bona fide number 1 top line. Like, do you think there's any combination of the top 6 here that could match that line?
Well, we'd have to look into the stats, but I know in terms of I don't know about Corsi and stuff for back then, so I can't really compare that. But if you're looking at just numbers, obviously, like points and stuff, the closest thing we've had to the pizza line is the Tkachuk, Stützle, Giroux line. I'm pretty sure.
That's what made me think of that.
Putting up straight points, right? And it's a little bit interesting too, because if you're looking at the way that line was constructed back then, it's weird how similar it is in a way. Like, obviously, because it was I'm pretty sure it was Heatley, Spezza, Alfredson, right? Alfredson right wing, Heatley left, Spezza middle. Yep. Spezza, Stützle, you could probably have a comparable there, like really high-skilled, fast players who were really good at passing, but also have a pretty good shot. The old guy who's really good, Alfredson and Giroux. Yep. And then you also would have, the pure goal scorer. I guess you can kind of say Heatley and Tkachuk aren't the same kind of player. Tkachuk's more of a net front presence, more of, like he can tip, he can shoot, he can do a little bit of everything. You're really good forechecker. So I would say that, if you had to pick one, I would think Tkachuk, Stützle, Giroux. But then also, if you're talking about what line do we have now that could be as good as the pizza line? Well, we already saw from last year. I would argue the other possible would be Tkachuk, Norris, Batherson, because that was last year's best line, right? Unfortunately, Norris with his injury, Batherson with his kind of off year in terms of at least defensive play, it's not the same. But that line showed so much promise. And if we just, call this year a gimme year, being like, hey, with Norris's injury and with a lot of different variables changing the way that it was, maybe next year we can see another shot of that line and see how it works. Because if that line works, we're going to have an insane top 6. The same way as we were talking about it heading into the season, right? Before all the injuries came on. So right now, Tkachuk, Stützle, Giroux, probably our best line since the pizza line. But if we're talking about future, most likely Tkachuk, Norris, Batherson. Okay, or Stützle somewhere in between.
Let's get crazy just because you mentioned the future. Obviously, Josh Norris is the big missing piece, and Norris has spent so much of his career playing with Brady Tkachuk. But now, the most consistent, dominant duo on this team is Stützle, Tkachuk. Yeah. Looking ahead, if you're in a time machine and you get to day 1 of training camp, everybody's healthy. Are you starting Tkachuk with Stützle or with Norris?
I remember one of my main gripes coming out of preseason to the start of this season was that Smith ran almost the entirety of preseason Tkachuk, Norris, Batherson, DeBrincat, Stützle, Giroux. I'm pretty sure. And it was only towards the end of it whenever he thought the second line's passing too much. We got to put more of a shooter or some other. I remember things were mentioned as well that they swapped the centers where it was Tkachuk, Stützle, Batherson, and then DeBrincat, Norris, Giroux. I'm pretty sure that was how we started off the year. And I was kind of annoyed because I'm like, hey, you practice essentially the majority of your time in the preseason with these 2 lines set up, and then you swap it so close to the season where they haven't developed the same chemistry. Even if they're not producing as well, at least they've had the time to practice with each other, to build that experience you need with new players together on a team, right? Especially with 2 new signings into DeBrincat and Giroux, and then obviously a player like Norris or a player like Stützle who's still evolving as a player. So I personally thought I was completely fine with keeping the lines as they were in the preseason, going Kachuk, Norris, Batherson, the same line that we saw last year tear up a lot of 5v5 on many teams, and then go with Stützle, DeBrincat, Giroux, and have Stützle have that ability where not only can he grow, he learns from Giroux, but he also has the shooter of DeBrincat on him. And it's basically, that line can build chemistry together. So even if I were going to time machine, I would still hold that opinion. I think swapping the centers as they did earlier on in the season, it didn't like ruin the team or anything. Like they were still good. It was still a good top six, but you ruined the chemistry that you could have potentially had earlier on in the season.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, everyone was so excited about DeBrincat, Stützle, and Giroux. Like we were losing our minds, being like, "Hey, we're not just a one-line team now.
Yeah.
We finally have a 1-2 punch here." Moving closer to the trade deadline here, Michael. What is this team gonna do? Like I flip flop so often on what I think this team should do, so I want to get your take on this.
I think that with how Dorian has been talking through the press about what he's thinking about to do for the trade deadline, I have the biggest inkling that we're going to have nothing happen, but a lot be talked about. I think this is going to be one of those deadlines where like the Sens are going, like he's been mentioning before, how this Rangers game that's upcoming is really the barometer, like how our score is, how we've played, how our record is going to determine what we're going to do, whether we're buyers or sellers. And I feel like the only guaranteed pieces that even might be moved would be Talbot and like possibly Holden. There's
Watson.
Watson. A lot of those players who are kind of in a way inconsequential to the future of this roster. No offense. But I also feel like when it comes to how we do, the only way I can see us really making a big trade deadline move is if we stomp until New York. Like if we go on a run and get shutouts, get a lot of goals on the board, look at least decent defensively. Obviously now Zub's back and Branny's been doing great with him, and and Shabbat obviously looked better in the game where we had the 7-goal span, not too great in the most recent one against Boston, but everyone was tired. It's basically like if we can do good until then, that's the only opportunity where I can see us going for a Uyghur, like it's in the rumors, or like for a Pareko, that's in the rumors. And everyone's talking about how the pressure on Dorian is twofold. One, because he said he knows that he needs a top 4D, like a top 4 right-handed D. But then also two, there's the rumors of new ownership might come in. He might he might be let go from his position. There might be more changes to the staff in general along the Sens. So he'd want to make a move. He'd want to prove like, hey, I'm in this. I can make the team better now, and I can show you that I can be the GM for the future. But so much of that second point is just like question marks all around, because we have no idea how fast this ownership's coming in yet. We don't know who the new ownership is. We don't know what their goals are going to be immediately. Would they want playoffs next year, or would they want playoffs 2 years from now? It's a weird position. So I feel like unless we have a rampant run by that New York game that Dorian was mentioning, I think it'll probably only be like Talbot, Watson, maybe Holden, a couple small moves, and hopefully get some more of that Belleville youth into the bottom 6, because I do want to see Sokolov play. I do want to see Crooker play. I want to, obviously, if Lodin ends up getting healthier, I think he's out for a longer period of time though, if I'm mistaking it. But there's a lot of players you can try in that bottom 6 role. So getting someone out to put them in, especially if the season's kind of not lost, but we're in that period where we need to try out new stuff in the bottom 6 anyway. Like go for it, right? And if that's your goal, then there's probably not going to be a lot of changes.
Where are you at with where the team's at right now? Are you on team sniffing around?
So how do I put it? If you would have told me heading into the trade deadline last year, the Sens are going to be above hockey 500, very close to actual 500 if you include overtime losses, and they're going to be in a position where even with injuries, they could potentially go on a playoff run, I would be ecstatic.
Yeah.
But actually watching the season through, it's a roller coaster. There's so many ups and downs that can cause so much frustration. And I think that the team that we expected the Sens to be are what they are. The injuries have made it hard for them, which is fair. It would be for any team. And I'm of the mindset where anything's possible, but looking at it from a realistic point of view, they're probably going to miss it. But at the same time, I was happy with them missing the playoffs, but playing really well.
Yep.
So if they miss the playoffs, but play really well, I got what I wished for. I can't be that mad. Yes, I can say like, oh, I'm disappointed the injuries came in. We could have performed better. Or, if we had made this lineup change earlier in the year, we probably would have gotten into the playoffs as opposed to missing it. Like, as much as you can harp on that sort of stuff, as a guy who's inherently usually more pessimistic than optimistic, I'm going to tend to the optimistic side because, hey, at least I'm seeing the Sens with an above 500 record for longer than a week. which is something we can't say over the past couple of years. So if you're looking just about the playoff question, I don't think we're gonna make it. But at the same time, anything's possible, and I don't think we're completely out of it yet, which is positive enough for me to say, like, yeah, I'm still invested. Yeah, I'm still gonna go see games. If they lay an egg, it's gonna suck, especially with how important each game is. But I'm of the mindset where I don't think it's playoffs, but I'll be happy to be surprised.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. And especially, like, what's your reward for getting into the final wildcard spot? You get to play the Bruins first round.
But then again, that at that point, it's house money. At that point, no matter what you do, it's success. You made the playoffs for the first time in a long time. And even if you win one game against Boston in that series, that at least proves something. It proves like, hey, you can keep up with a team in the playoffs as one of the best teams too, as a team that we've weirdly had a better record with than most other teams in this regular season. So at that, if they make the playoffs this year, no matter who they face and how they go out, I am happy.
Yeah.
If they don't make the playoffs, if they break like that kind of 90-point plateau, like 85, 90-point plateau, I'll be ecstatic. Especially because we have so many players who are having great seasons. So I can say, like, hey, he's going to get better next year. He's going to get better next year. There's so many players you can point to for that, especially if, we include some more of those rookies that are still in the development system.
Yep, absolutely. Now, final question for me, Michael, and this is how I've been ending SensCentral Citizens off lately is there anything you wanted to tee up in this SensCentral Citizen and we just didn't get to? Because I hate when we end recording and people are like, oh man, I had this story. So I'm just going to pass the mic back to you for anything you got for us.
I have a funny story. It's not necessarily entirely interesting. So this is back during, I believe, the Fan Fest in 2018 or 2019.
So you've been to a lot of Fan Fests, eh?
Yes. I was
Nice.
especially in university. Like, I was just one of those kids who would go to school and go home. There wasn't a lot of the only social life I had was going to the unfortunately now closed Blurry Pixel that was downtown on Queen. That was an awesome little gaming pub area. They had old consoles you can play on for free, get some food, chill with some people. I used to go there a lot, but aside from that, I wasn't really super social outside of social media and aspects like that, and obviously at school. So for me, it was like any chance that I could go to get involved in Sens stuff without paying a ticket. I'm like, oh, I'm in it. I'm in that 100%. And FanFest is always easy. I remember, a little bit off the story, but I even did a recording of one time at a FanFest because I was trying to do almost like a YouTube channel around Sens content. And unfortunately, with how much school picked up, I just wasn't able to. But I did a video around going to a FanFest, talking to people, getting their opinions in the upcoming season. I'm not sure if that was the same year this story happened. I think it might have been. I'm walking around the CTC, outside the entrances to the 200 and 300 levels, where all the convenience stores and all those, washrooms are. And it's empty, right? It's the Fan Fest, so there's not many people around. They're doing the practice skates inside the arena. So you have a lot of people either sitting in or they're outside because it is the summer. So it actually is towards the end of the summer. So it's pretty nice. And I'm walking around trying to find people to talk to and get their opinion on how the upcoming season is going to go, recording it for my video. And I walk along, there's this one guy wearing the Sens kind of official, not practice, the jacket, the black jacket with just the simple logo on it. And then another guy wearing a Sens jersey walking along. And I'm focused on other people walking around. So I kind of get them in the corner of my eye. And I kind of turn to Sam and be like, hey, do you want to talk about this video about and I was trying to think okay, what's the thing I can mention that can get people to talk? And I thought okay, the recent trade that happened. And this was the Carlson trade. So this was involving, with Tierney coming in, with DeMello coming in, Balsers, the picks. And I'm trying to get a hold of these two people. And I turn, and as they turn to see me, the man in the jacket turns, the other guy's looking on past, kind of focusing on where he's supposed to go. And he's like, yeah, no, we can't right now. He has somewhere to go. And so I look at him, and side profile, I can't tell who it is. But then as I walk by, I turn back, and it's Chris Tierney.
Yeah.
just
Nice.
when he one of his first times arriving in the arena, he's walking around during the Fan Fest, and I tried to ask him, how do you think the team's gonna go? And I don't even think he heard. I think it was just the guy who was kind of his his assistant for his handler for learning a lot about the Sens moving here. But that was funny because that ended up being his best season as a Sen. That's when he played with Stone, had the 40
39 assists.
Yeah, and we thought okay, he could be a top 6 guy. He can maybe be a second line center. That was a lie. But at least in the end, that was a funny story just because it kind of went to show how frantic I was trying to do that video. Going out here, I want to talk to you if you okay. You'll mind me recording you? I'll put it on YouTube. And then I just straight up asked Chris Tierney and didn't recognize him. So that was a pretty funny moment.
I love it. That's awesome, Michael. So can we expect to see you around the CTC down the stretch here?
I mean, depending on a couple things, a lot of it, like unfortunately with my job right now, it really requires me to be glued to the computer. Like I won't go into too much detail, but a lot of these, like, for those who don't know, I'm an esports journalist. I actually write about competitive video games for a living, which is kind of a weird job to have.
Nice.
But it's also one of those things where I love doing it because because it's a passion of mine, but also it's because something that can build up my journalism experience as someone who didn't have any coming out of university. I was a film studies graduate. I had no journalism experience, but I was lucky enough where I followed a passion and it led me to this job. And with these events, they usually happen around the same time as hockey games in terms of the time of the day. So just a lot of the time, I just have to stick to it. And like my current schedule, I can watch the game. Luckily enough, I don't have to worry about not missing the game entirely. I just can't go to them as much as I'd like to. Not to mention financials aren't the greatest. You know, a lot of people are getting hit right now, unfortunately, especially in like the media sphere. But no, I'll try to, especially if the Sens keep it up towards the end of the season and they are making that playoff push. I'll probably buy a couple tickets, watch a couple of games live, and support the boys.
That's awesome. Well, hey, people can also follow you on Twitter at Extra Wavy, spelled XTRA Wavy, WEIVY. Michael, really appreciate you coming on, man, and we'll do this again down the road.
Yes, thanks so much for the time. And yeah, just one more thing to say: go Sens, go!
All right. Stick taps to Michael for joining us. Great conversation with him. Make sure you're following him on Twitter as well. Pilsy, the Belleville Sens. My goodness. Not to end on a sad note, but there are a couple of bright spots despite, where did you say they are in the league ranks?
Last I checked, they were 29th out of 31. And if you guys remember, I'm known for always hitting my hot takes. My hot takes are always, they come out of the oven perfectly crispy. But my hot take for this season, Ross, was that the Belleville Senators would make a run all the way to the Calder Cup finals. My God, was that off.
Under Troy Mann, right?
Yeah, that was the plan, yeah.
You know who's playing pretty well, though, right now?
Hit me.
Roby Yarventi, red light Roby. I wouldn't even mind seeing him for a game. I know, like, Igor's due. Igor is overdue.
Yeah, it's Igor. Yeah, it's Igor.
You talk about being crispy coming out of the oven. Like, at some point, you got to take it out before it's burnt, overcooked, right? You don't want the meat to harden. You need to come out farm to fork tender.
Yes, exactly. And look, I love Crooker, but it's Igor's time, and I think Crooker could maintain his success in Belleville, but I don't know what's left for Igor in Belleville, especially with them squandering at the bottom of the league here.
Yeah, I mean, he's their all-time leading goal scorer, all-time leading point.
Yeah, like, come on.
He has 8 NHL games to prove himself. It's tough. Now, Crooker, on the other hand, if they do end up trading Austin Watson, then you can convince me, hey, that's a good spot for him to start, get his feet wet, play his first NHL game on the fourth line. But
nah, I'd rather have him play big minutes in Belleville than play on the fourth line.
Okay, well, interesting. I think Roby, though, 4 goals and 2 assists in his last 4 games, back-to-back 2-goal performances. I think that deserves a little attention as well for still one of the younger players in the league. He's 20 until August 8th, right? Him and Ridley Gregg have the same birthday, but because it's his 3rd year playing in North America, it almost feels like he's been around forever. But this guy was the youngest player in the league last year.
Yeah, and Roby, I think people forget how good he is just because he's been injured a lot. He gets overshined by Sokolov, Gregg, Crooker, all those guys, but Roby Yarventi is legit, and he's a guy with size and an elite release. So I still have a lot of high hopes for Roby.
One other guy, though, I'm a little nervous about right now, Victor Lodin. Victor Lodin, man. He started the year so well, 12 points in his first 15 games. I know he's had a couple injuries here and there. He's got 3 points in his last 12, 1 goal over that span. Like, that's tough because he's 23, 24. Like, he's getting to the age now where these other prospects are all ahead of him. We thought, like, again, just kind of like we talked about Joseph earlier in the episode where he came in hot. Like, Victor Lodin last year came in, had 8 points in 10 games.
And nice goals, too.
And earned a spot in game 82, earned that first NHL game. But now it seems like he's regressed a little bit, and that's tough because when he's on his game, he's one of the most fun players to watch. He's got amazing hands and vision.
Yeah, I mean, we talked to Igor about it, and he's just like, yeah, Victor Lodin is absolutely sick. But he's one of those guys where either it's all clicking for him and he looks amazing, or he's struggling to get it going. So the inconsistency there is going to be tough to deal with.
What's your final thought for today's show?
Final thought for today's show is it's great to have the reinforcements back. Ross, we were setting our lines for the show, making the graphic, and we were like, oh, the only injured players are Forsberg and Norris. And I was like, no way. Like, this team has to have more injuries. That's it. So, yes, your 1B goalie and your second line center, those are still big misses to have in a time where you're coming up to meaningful games in the trade deadline. But apart from that, this team is pretty healthy. So now they've got it all together. This is a crucial point in time, especially the Detroit games. Let's see what this squad can actually do.
My final thoughts is, oh my God, did you see what Elliot Friedman wrote in 32 Thoughts? The Sens are working on getting a defenseman.
Yes. The Sens are working on getting a defenseman, yes.
My goodness. How long is this saga going to go on for? I feel like it's been a 5-year process.
It kind of has been. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, hopefully this is old takes exposed, and by the time you're listening to this, the Senators have pulled the trigger on all the defensemen, because I wrote yesterday when Frank Saravalli reported. It was funny. He reported it after I mentioned that, like, it was kind of a name floating out that we just saw play on the weekend. I was like, hey, he looked all right. And then Saravalli comes out. The Senators have inquired on Colton Parayko. So if you want to hear more about our thoughts on that, you can find that yesterday. But I replied to him. I just said, they've reportedly called on Parayko, Seth Jones, Erik Karlsson, Mackenzie Weegar, Matt Roy, Sean Walker, Tyler Myers. Like, let us know which defenseman they don't inquire on.
Honestly, yeah, save us a little time there, yeah.
No doubt. Well, hopefully we see the end of this saga, and the Sens, man, if they could pick up a defenseman and a few wins here in the next week, we're going full delusion mode after the Buffalo Sabres lost to the Toronto Maple Leafs yesterday. The Red Wings got the win, which makes Monday and Tuesday all that more important. It's a control your destiny type week. What are you going to go out and do, Senators? Are you going to get 3 or 4 wins, or are you going to disappoint us? We'll find out sooner rather than later. I know someone who's not going to disappoint. John Abbott will join the show tomorrow from Carolina, where he gets set to call that game on Friday. So we'll look forward to that. But for today, we say goodbye. For Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan, and this has been the Locked On Senators podcast. Your team every day.